everyone, good day. Today I'm going to discuss here about balancing chemical equation. But before that, we're going to make sandwiches, okay? Isa may ganag sandwich today. Of course, I know you would like sandwich. So maghimo tag sandwich. In producing a cheese sandwich, we would need slices of bread and cheese. So, kung magbuhat tag isa diri, isa ka sandwich, we would need 2 slices of bread, of course. Lita kahimog cheese sandwich if walay slice of bread. Of course, kay gitawag man siya nga cheese sandwich, we would need cheese. So, we have 2 slices of bread and 1 slice of cheese to produce a cheese sandwich. So, kung magbuhat tag duha ka buok, you would need 4 slices of bread and 2 slices of cheese to create 2 sandwiches. Okay, so this one here, the bread and the cheese are what we call reactants. If we're talking about chemical equation. So this one are the reactants and these are the product. So definitely kay naggamit man ta diri og slices of bread ang atong product pod. Of course, napoy bread. We would not expect nga kung nagamit tag bread diri sa atong mabuo is pizza. Okay? Dili na siya yung anas. Since we are talking about balancing chemical equation, kung ano ang nasa product ay sa reactants, mo ang nasa product. So for example, may tag 4 moles of hydrogen. Natay 4 moles of hydrogen in a reactant. You would expect that in the product, we have also 4 moles of hydrogen. So let's try to make water. We are done with this making of sandwiches. Now let's proceed to making of water. So in producing a water, we would need hydrogen and oxygen. Kay H2O man atong water. So we would need 2 moles of H2. Remember that, tanawa, can you observe this nga nagpurma nga tong hydrogen, ka-intact siya. It's because hydrogen are diatomic molecule. It exists as diatomic molecule. So kung natay word problem nga makita nga it reacts with hydrogen, you would not simply write it as H. Dapat H2 siya. And it reacts with 1 mole of oxygen. And oxygen also is a diatomic molecule. So maong O2 atong butang, naka-intact siya. And it produces or yields 2 moles of H2O. So as you can observe, we have balance. This is a balanced chemical equation. We have 2 moles of hydrogen, but the total atom of hydrogen in reactants and in the product are balanced. See, we have 2 times 2, that's 4. And in the product, we have 2 times 2, that's 4 also. Okay? What about the oxygen? We have 1 times 2, this is 1 mole. 1 times 2, that's 2. In the product, 2 times 1, that's 2. So they are balanced, diba? It's very simple. This is what we call an inspection method. You have simply to inspect whether the reactants are balanced with the product. So mata-mata na siya. That's what you call an inspection method. But remember, we have to deal with the guidelines before we do the inspection method. So what are the guidelines? Let's try to see this.
Here are some of the guidelines in balancing simple chemical equations by the inspection method. Number 1. Coefficients are written before formulas. Subscripts for atoms in the correct formulas are never changed to balance an equation because such change would mean another substance or maybe wrong formula. Number 2. Coefficients are reduced to the smallest whole number. Number 3. The final balance equation should not contain fractional coefficients except when writing thermochemical equations. And number 4. The balance equations are always checked to make sure every element is represented by the same number of atoms on both sides of the equation.
So we already know the inspection method. By this time, let's have an exercises in solving balancing chemical equation using the inspection method.
by this time, I'm going to introduce to you another method, which is what we call the matrix method. This is quite similar to the method that we usually learn, but I think this is not found in the book or in the internet, because this method was devised by our professor in college, Dr. Larini Cabigan, and I'm very glad to share it with you because it's quite easy compared to the method that we usually learn. Because when I was in high school, I usually take time to balance the chemical reaction because lisod kayo siya. And when we were introduced into this method, dali ra kayo siya. So, how do we do it? First thing we have to do is to write the skeletal equation. The skeletal equation should be written with the correct formula of reactants followed by an arrow and the correct formulas of the products. Remember that for the elements, the formula corresponds to their symbols except for the 7 elements which are represented as diatomic molecules, which includes the oxygen, the nitrogen, the fluorine, the iodine, bromine, chlorine. So, if you encounter this, especially in a word problem, umingon siyang oxygen, when you write it in a chemical equation, you will not simply write it as O. So, but nga mo siyang O2 because it exists as diatomic molecule. Or hydrogen, umingon siyang reacts with hydrogen, you will not write it as H only. So, you would write it as H2 because it exists as a diatomic molecule. So, for example, you have a problem. Excuse me. Aqueous aluminum nitrate reacts with aqueous sodium hydroxide to form aqueous aluminum hydroxide and aqueous sodium nitrate. This is quite hard to write because it was written in a word form. So, usually some of the problems are really written in a word form. That is why it's very important for a student to familiarize how to write the chemical formula or how to convert the word form into chemical formula. So, for example, sulfuric acid, how will you write it in a chemical formula? Kung di akabalo, you cannot balance it because it's in words. And in balancing, you have to deal with atoms. So, kung sulfuric, anara, words say mo na balan, di ito kakabalo. So, now let's try aluminum nitrate. How do we write aluminum nitrate? Aluminum, claro. Okay. Aluminum nitrate reacts with, and by the way, in chemistry, you will not read it as plus. You would simply read it as reacts with sodium hydroxide or NaOH, written as NaOH, forms aqueous aluminum hydroxide. Aluminum hydroxide. Oh my gosh. Aluminum hydroxide and sodium nitrate. And when you're going to read this one, you're not going this arrow, you're not going to read it as arrow in a chemical equation. This is read as form, yields, or produces. So, okay, now the next thing you have to do is to write the atoms under the arrow. So, now let's begin with this compound. By the way, you have first to deal with compounds. Say, for example, kung nakay problem nga, example, carbon sulfide reacts with oxygen, something like that. Usually, you have to deal with oxygen lastly. Sa last mo na siya ibutang. Because you have to write individually the atoms in here para mas dali i-balance. So, for example, this compound. You have to write aluminum. Then, nitrogen. Oxygen, so you would write it in the last. Sodium. Oxygen last. And hydrogen. Then lastly, the oxygen. Okay? The next thing you have to do is to write dashes. Para mas dali, ika malibat. Itunong lang mo siya dali sa element. Now, in balancing this equation, you have see to it the number of atoms in the products is the same with the number of atoms in the reactants. So now, let's begin with aluminum. So this one, let's try this first. This compound, this is aluminum nitrate. How many number of atoms, of aluminum atoms are there? This one, we have 1. What about nitrogen? Do we have a nitrogen? Okay, 1. Do we have to write it in 1? Definitely not, because we have 3 here. 1 times 3, that's 3. Now, sodium. Do we have a sodium here? No, we don't have sodium. Hydrogen, we also don't have the hydrogen. Then oxygen. We have 6. 3 times, I know. That's 9. 3 times 3, that's 9. Okay, now let's move on to this compound, sodium hydroxide. Aluminum, we don't have aluminum there. The nitrogen, do we have a nitrogen in there? 1, do we have? You have to write it in 1. Now, this is sodium. This exists as one element, sodium. You cannot write it as nitrogen because it's simply as N. No. That's sodium, so we have to write 1 sodium here, 1 oxygen, and 1 hydrogen. Now let's proceed to the product. We have 1 aluminum, we don't have nitrogen, we don't have the sodium, we have 9. Is that it? Hydroxide. Okay, that's wrong. We don't have the 3 there. It's hydroxide, by the way. Hydroxide don't have a 3. I'm sorry for that. We have 3. Okay, then oxygen we have 3. Am I right? Okay, now let's proceed to sodium nitrate. That's 1. Nitrogen, that's 1. Oxygen, that's 3. Okay, now, observe the number of atoms in the reactants and the product. Let's begin with aluminum. We have 1 atoms here in the reactants and 1 in the products. That's partially balanced. So, di na ito sila tandugon. Now, let's move on to nitrogen. We have 3 in here and we have 1 in here. So, definitely they're not balanced. So, in balancing it, para mabalance siya, what we have to do? We have to look for a number na ma-multiply na ito ani nga number para mag-equal siya sa atong reactants. So, unsa man nga number? That's 3. Okay, 1 times 3, that's 3. And we have 3 in here, so they are partially balanced. Now, by the way, I almost forgot, if you were going to multiply 3 here, you have see to it that the number here, the rest of the numbers, will be also multiplied by 3 because we're dealing with proportionality. Okay? Now, again, let's try to see to it. We have 1 aluminum, they're balanced. We have 3 in here and 3. The nitrogen, we have 3 in here and 1 in here. So, not. They're not balanced, so we have to multiply it 3. 3 also here. Again, we have to. Okay, that's 3. Okay, now let's proceed to hydrogen. 1 times 2, that's 3, and 3 in here. Now, what about the oxygen? We have 1 times 3, that's 3. That's 9, that's 12. What about the oxygen? 3 times 3, that's 9. And plus 3, it's 12. So, they're all balanced. Now, this one, the numbers that we multiplied to the rest of the numbers will serve as our coefficient of our compound. Okay? So, natay 3 diri, natay 3 diri. So, this is our final balanced chemical reaction. It's quite easy, right? So, if mag-try and error method ka, lisod ka ayo. Okay. Tanawin mo diri. Mag-mental-mental pa ka. Number 3 mo i-multiply. Katandog na po diri. So, it's very hard. So, this one, this is the answer to that question nga medyo lisod ka ayo mag-balance. Usually, things like this equation like this, if this method was not introduced, usually it takes, I think, it would take 3 minutes for me to solve. Lisod kayo, but with the help of the matrix method, Sa'yo na kayo siya. Okay? Now, let's try another problem.